Welcome to this latest Travel Weekly webcast. I'm Ian Taylor of Travel Weekly, and I'm joined today by Mark Tanzer, Chief Executive of Abta, who's here primarily to talk about Abta's travel convention, which will be on October the 14th. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Ian.
The convention will be very different this year. How's it going to work?
Well, it will be different in the way it's delivered, for sure, but I think the concept of the convention will stick to the model that we've established over quite a few years now, which has proved very successful. We take a forward-looking view of our world, our business, the travel industry, and then your particular business, what you can do, what lessons you can take back, and that will still be the kind of structure of the event. Of course, the other attraction of the normal convention is that we're in overseas destinations, so you have a chance to experience that. And we're very sorry that we had to postpone Morocco for this year and move instead to a virtual delivery of the convention. So we are treading new ground here. It is an amazing technology. I've seen it myself, and you can really recreate a three-dimensional virtual convention center for the business sessions, which is quite uncanny. And it will be moderated by Chris Shipp, who has moderated the last few conventions very successfully. And we have the facility for workshops, actually more workshops than we would normally have in a physical space, and also for people to be able to contact each other directly. So the networking part of the event we can also recreate. So it will be different. I mean, the technology will be different, and we'll be learning, I'm sure, as we go through it. But I hope that the overall convention experience will be familiar to those who have been in the past.
Okay, and will it be interactive? Will people be able to ask questions of the speakers and so on?
Yes, they will. You'll be able to put questions and get obviously responses as well. So we're trying to make it as interactive as possible, not just between sort of the event on stage and delegates, but between delegates themselves, so that there can be that, as I say, that networking environment for people to be able to talk to each other.
Okay, and it'll be available on October the 14th, and then people can download it, look at it whenever they want to, stream it subsequently, can't they, for a period?
That's correct.
Why did you see it as important to go ahead with the convention this year?
Well, I think the demand for people to come together and talk about big issues is very strong in the travel industry. If you think back to last year, seems a long time ago, we just had the failure of Thomas Cook. There was real appetite for understanding what the ramifications of that would be. 2 years before that, we had the failure of Monarch. So it's as though our convention has sort of always got something to talk about. And of course, with COVID this year, there's never been a better time for us to come together, and sort of lessons learned, but also looking forward as to how we start to really rebuild the industry post-COVID.
So will the content be shaped overwhelmingly by COVID?
Well, I hope not. I hope it won't be obsessed with COVID, but it's impossible to escape that at the moment. It is the big question overshadowing the economy, macroeconomics, microeconomics, how are the consumers going to change their behaviors after COVID, and then, of course, the business recovery side of it. So it's very likely to feature as a thread throughout the whole day. Sadly, I don't think we will be out the other side of the COVID crisis by the time we get to October the 14th. So I think it will still be a current issue, but I hope, as we look forward, we'll see sort of shafts of light.
Okay. You haven't got a crystal ball, but by mid-October, where do you think we'll be in terms of travel restrictions and travel advice, or where would you hope we'll be?
Well, what I'd hope is that we can move from whole country advice to regional advice. We lobbied the government very hard to move away from blanket advisories, where everywhere was off limits, to country advice. And so that's been a step forward. But now we really need to move to the next stage where confidence in testing and in the data means that the government can be far more accurate in its travel advice, so that areas that aren't affected don't get put off limits. I think the government is clearly taking a very cautious approach to issues such as quarantine, and we're not going to stand against that, but what we want is the application of it in a much more targeted way.
Okay, and is it reasonable to think that we may see that more targeted approach regional corridors, testing at airports and so on by October? Or is that still too soon?
I think I don't think we'll have a comprehensive system of testing in place by October. I've seen prototypes, as you probably have, in the media over the last days. The technology is there. I think for me, the question is the physical process. How do you move people through an airport with a large-scale testing program without snarling up the entire airport? So I think personally, it's more likely that testing will be on a home basis with the opportunity to sort of reduce quarantine period, ideally. If we can make progress in that, it's not ideal in terms of it will still be a deterrent to some from travelling, but I hope it will be better than a 14-day quarantine. So if we can see movement in that direction, that will be positive.
How much would quarantine need to be reduced, do you think? Because there's talk of a 10-day quarantine with a test after 5 or 8 days of arriving in the country and so on. But really, for most leisure travellers, that's not going to make a huge difference, is it? 10 days to 14 days?
No, I agree. As I say, I think it is still a barrier to some who, certainly for short-term, short-haul travel where you go for a business trip and you come back and you're quarantined for a long period of time, or weekend trips and so forth. So anything we can do to get that time frame down through testing is going to help. But I don't think we will be in a test-free environment or a quarantine-free environment by the time we get to October.
Okay. And what's Abta doing to try and shape the Foreign Office advice and the Home Office Department for Transport, quarantine restrictions?
Well, we're engaged very closely with all these departments on these issues, Ian. I think I have to say that although normally it's easy to be critical of government departments, I think they are doing a good job in a very difficult set of circumstances at the departmental level. And there are joint workshops going on looking at testing and the logistics of that. As I say, we are constantly in dialogue with the Foreign Office to try and move them to a more regional approach to quarantine, and that will continue. And of course, we also are very importantly in touch with the Foreign Office just to keep members updated on what the latest advice is. It's a moving picture, it's quite complicated, different countries come in and go out. So we created a site for our members where they can go and check exactly what the status is for any country that they are selling arrangements, selling holidays to people at the moment.
Yeah, we've got this weekly process, it seems, at the moment, although obviously things could change in between these weekly announcements. But the notice of, we get an announcement on a Thursday, often late on a Thursday, of a change from 4 in the morning on a Saturday. Is there any prospect of a bit more warning, or is 36 hours or so probably what the industry is going to have to live with?
I think the problem is that the actual infection rates keep spiking very suddenly, and that's, I think, because of people coming together, large groups, or not obeying social distancing regulations overseas, and suddenly you can see a very sudden increase in infection rates, and we've seen it over the last few days in Croatia and Austria, and government clearly want to react to that rather than sort of say, well, we'll give it a week and then so everyone can take whatever measures they can. So I think the sort of 36-hour period that they seem to be working to at the moment is probably what we're going to have to live with, as long as the infection rates keep moving at the pace they do. Clearly, if the infection rate is on a slower trajectory and you can see it moving, then you can give a longer warning. But it seems to be very jagged at the moment as you look across the different countries.
So what shape in that case do you think the majority of Abta members and most of the outbound sector will be in by mid-October, Mark, given that it seems we can't expect too much change between now and then?
Well, the travel restrictions to Spain have obviously been a big dent for a lot of members. It is the biggest outbound market, and effectively we've lost the late summer season, and that certainly won't have helped travel companies. I think from our members, people have been taking steps in any way they can with their own finances and their own structure to prepare themselves for what could be quite a lean summer, and probably anticipating that rather than hoping for a boom. So I think a lot of companies have taken steps, people on furlough, sadly redundancies as well, to weather the storm. So I think I hope that the length of time this has gone on means that a lot of companies will have been able to get themselves prepared for the October, September renewals, ATOL renewals, etc., and talking to their financial bond providers, etc.
How difficult are the September renewals likely to be? Are most Abta members going to get through that okay?
Well, I hope so. And as I say, they've had a lot of. I know a lot of them have taken difficult measures to get in shape for that. Normally, renewals look at historical financials, which aren't going to be very useful in this climate. So it'll be a question of having prepared cash flow forecasts, financial forecasts for a number of different scenarios. These are good businesses. I think even the most pessimistic people don't think that the travel market has disappeared. It's a question of when it's going to come back, and making sure that we are able to build customer confidence to get it back as quickly as possible, and that the companies are there to then meet that need.
Okay. Are you hoping to see more support from the government in the autumn?
Yes, we'd like that very much. We've just completed a member survey of our own, which shows that quite a number of redundancies have already taken place. And there's definitely a sense that if without government support, there'll be more job losses down the line. So we'd like government to support the market coming back by an APD holiday. It's maybe small in the scheme of things for the government, but it helps the travel industry. I think specific grants for the SME sector, as they've done in other sectors, will still be needed through the recovery period. And also importantly, the furlough scheme, not extended in its current format, but adapted as a salary support scheme so that people can work and also receive government support, because that will help travel companies in particular get going on the road to recovery. So those are what we're asking, the Chancellor for, and we'll keep up the pressure on making the government aware of the impact of this in terms of jobs, in terms of GDP contribution that the travel industry makes. I think the outbound sector is sometimes overlooked by politicians. They think of travel as bringing people into the UK or people having staycations, and don't realise the enormous job creation and the long supply chain that depends on the outbound sector.
And a salary support scheme, I mean, are you hopeful that you're going to see that? Are you getting any intimation that the government is seriously considering that sector-specific support in that way?
Well, we know that there are a lot of different industrial sectors who are making the same claims at the moment, Ian. I'm not naive enough to think we're the only ones who are going to the government asking for salary support and emergency support. But I think if you look at the whole sort of value chain or supply chain of travel, including the airlines and the airports, it is a strategic industry. It's not something that the government can afford to let fail, frankly. And I think that is the particular argument. And of course, airlines need people to sit on the aeroplanes, so you have to have the whole chain supported, not just the airlines themselves. And so I'm hopeful that those arguments will carry weight with the Treasury, albeit, as I say, that there are a lot of other industrial sectors who will be in the queue as well for support.
And air passenger duty, if that was to be temporarily suspended, would you envisage that the money just being pocketed by the airlines, or would you expect to see it passed on in reductions in fares?
Well, I think the strategic priority is to get people on the planes. So I think the way to do that is to reduce the fares, not to have a higher margin when people aren't travelling. So the logic is to make sure that the customers are able to gives that additional incentive to customers to book and to travel.
Okay, and the survey, the member survey you said you did, what sort of picture of the level of redundancies did that give you? Can you put a figure on it, or sort of a percentage?
We'll be announcing that very shortly, Ian. it's in the tens of thousands of redundancies already. And if you look at the supply chain that depends on those jobs, then you're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands. So this is a very significant, and of course it's right across the country. It affects regions. It's not London based. It is it's hitting areas that are in already got a lot of economic problems as well.
Okay, well, look, the point of the convention is not just to reflect on how difficult things are; it's to look forward, isn't it? So,
Sure.
will it point to a pathway to recovery?
Well, I think it will be very interesting to hear. We have Yael Selfin, who is the chief economist from KPMG, and it will be very interesting to hear what the macroeconomic forecast is. At the end of the day, we are all sort of subject to the wider economy and how quickly consumer confidence kicks up, consumer spending, and that will include travel. So I think understanding, at the macro level, what the scenario looks like will be very interesting. I've seen a number of forecasts by consultancies as to recovery for the aviation sector and the travel sector, and they have got different lengths, but the shape is always the same, and it looks like a mountain range. It goes up and then there's a setback, it goes up. It isn't a smooth straight line recovery. And I think one of the things will be interesting to talk about is how, if that is the shape of the recovery, can we build in sort of shock absorbers, so to speak, so that we don't have a start-stop and the customers go and then they're not going in the way they have over the last few months. From what we've learned, how can we anticipate a sort of slowing down, moving ahead as the virus works its way forward. So that'll be interesting. I think there will be changes in consumer behavior. I mean, consumers at home over the last 6 months have got used to digital lives, and that will impact high street perhaps and impact their buying patterns altogether. So at the micro level, there are changes. And also, of course, there are changes in the workplace. We've all been working from home. Certainly at Abta, there are good parts of that people would like to preserve. There are bits that they really miss about the physical presence in the office. So how are you going to come up with a working model that not just from a hygiene and a safety point of view works, but is a new model that people are going to work in and feel happy and comfortable. And I think no one has the answer to those questions, but there's certainly a lot of thinking going on. It'd be good to discuss that. And these aren't hypothetical. We've all got to figure out, how do we go back to our office? So it's not a sort of that's interesting thought piece. That's okay. Yeah, what am I going to do with my office? So I think the road to recovery has got a number of different aspects, all of which will need to fall into place as we build back towards where we were before COVID.
Okay, so all these things will be discussed at the convention, and you said the road to recovery looks a bit like a mountain range with a series of peaks, plateaus, troughs, I suppose. But what might recovery ultimately look like? I mean, is travel going to go back to the kind of level it was before, even if the experience is a bit different and it's distributed a bit differently and so on? Or do you foresee a reduced overall demand for international travel as a consequence of this?
I don't, Ian. You wouldn't expect me to say I do, but I really don't see any evidence of that. I think the way in which travel organisers think about sort of density of people, about distancing, will persist after COVID. I think people maybe just be more cagey about being jammed together with other people they don't know. That could just be part of the way we live our lives in future, and travel will have to take account of that. I think on the positive side, some of the what we've seen, or the impact on destinations of no travel, has stuck with people. And I think sustainability, which was a big theme at last year's convention, is still a big challenge for the industry. Not just in terms of carbon emissions and carbon reduction, but in terms of the impact on communities. Communities need tourism. A lot of communities depend on it. And I think if it were to slow down or stop, you'd get some very adverse effects right across the world. So I think We want people to travel. I think it's good to travel. We need to manage the impacts, the environmental and social impacts of that. But if we do that well, and maybe COVID has given us an opportunity to sort of pause and rethink as we rebuild, then I see no reason why it can't get back to levels that it was before the virus appeared.
Okay, and what does Abta have planned to try to help reassure consumers that it's safe to travel?
I think the best way to build customer confidence is to have really good information that is accurate about the destination, about the experience, about your rights, cancellation. I think PR that tells people, X destination is a sunny place. They know that, and particularly if you've been rained on for the last week in England, you know that there are attractions to being in the Mediterranean. I think to get people back booking confidently, travel agents, tour operators, the media need to have really clear information, guidance for the customers. And then I think that will be the biggest single thing to rebuild customer confidence.
Okay. The Abta board reaffirmed the policy on Foreign Office advice, cancellations, refunds for consumers and so on last week. Is there any possibility of that policy changing?
Well, the system whereby Foreign Office advice has been a trigger for customer refunds has been in existence forever, as far as I know, certainly for long before I came into the industry, and it has worked very well as a single standard that is used across the industry. And I think what the board was saying when they reaffirmed that last week was that where a customer books with that expectation, he or she shouldn't be left in a position where they either have to lose their money or they have to travel and where they're not comfortable or they're not at ease. And I think that is an important principle that will persist. I think the other thing is that if it is left, if we abandon the Foreign Office advice as the yardstick for cancellations and everybody decides for themselves, each tour operator, whether or not it is safe or it isn't safe, it will open Pandora's box for the industry. You will have a slew of court cases, disputes, and whatever. So I think that that simple yardstick has worked very well, and it would be a mistake for the industry to let it go.
Okay. Are there any issues that the convention is going to tackle aside from COVID and COVID-related questions? I mean, you've already touched on climate and sustainability, but Brexit is also looming, isn't it, at the end of the year? Are we going to need to discuss that?
Yes, we have a gentleman called Ruparel, who was formerly an advisor to the Prime Minister on Brexit, who will be updating us on where the talks have got to by October, or as it looks at the moment, perhaps where they haven't got to. And I am sort of increasingly of the view that we will have to start preparing for a no-deal exit as we did last year, and we are updating. We've just updated our guidance for members on the steps that can be taken in advance of a no-deal exit, and also we'll be doing the same for customers. There may be a miraculous breakthrough, which would be great, but at the moment, with everybody, I think, particularly absorbed by COVID, those talks seem to be going very slowly.
Okay, is a no-deal Brexit, does it threaten to be as bad as we've been led to believe previously, or might the impact of COVID at least ameliorate the impact of Brexit?
Well, I haven't thought that they would ameliorate it. I thought it might double up. But I think I can't talk on a kind of national economy basis. I think from a travel point of view, we're very focused on particular issues that arise from Brexit. So, for instance, the ability to move workers around, the Posted Workers Directive. If that's not going to persist, what kind of arrangements will be in place so that people who are working in the ski season or tour reps can move? Because that's an important part of how we deliver holidays to people. And of course, there are the reciprocal consumer rights, such as health, roaming charges, so forth. That would be really useful on both sides, for Europeans coming here and for us going there to maintain. And of course, unfettered access to fly point to point from here to the European Union. So I think I've said it before, but this is a win-win situation. Both sides win with this. It's not like an industry where we are competing for space against the Europeans. We benefit by being able to send people to Europe, and Europe benefits by receiving them. So if common sense prevails, we should come up with structures that don't impede the recovery from COVID and are a good basis for travel in the future.
Okay. You've highlighted a couple of the speakers already. Are there other highlights? I know the full program's not been published and we don't know all the speakers, but are there other things that you're particularly looking forward to, or you think that people will particularly enjoy or get a lot from?
Well, it would be invidious to sort of pick out particular speakers. I think there's something for everybody in this. I think the combination of the industry practitioners coming together with the more academic, if you like, is very powerful. I mean, Gloria Guevara, who was interviewed in Travel Weekly last week, will be speaking. I think it's very interesting to hear from her because, of course, as president of WTTC, she has a global perspective on what is going on and the need to rebuild confidence globally. I'm also interested to hear from Jamie Lee Abta, who is the executive director of BAME Women in Travel. Black Lives Matter was a very, very urgent and sad sort of reminder of the challenges as a society we face in terms of diversity and discrimination. And I think it'll be very interesting to hear from her, particularly from a travel perspective, of the challenge ahead. And Paul Redmond is speaking. Paul's spoken at least 2 previous conventions and always is well received with his views of sort of from a university perspective, but of the kind of work demands of the younger generation coming into the workforce in the future. And I think, going back to what I just said, Ian, I think the world of work is going to change fundamentally coming out of COVID, and people want freedoms and not just in where they work, but the way they're managed, that we have to respect and meet that challenge.
Okay. Abta steered a careful course through this crisis. For example, on refunds, on its attitude to quarantine restrictions. You didn't come out and ask and join quash quarantine and so on. How important has that been to steer that course, would you say? And what would you say to those in the industry who are frustrated and want to see the government do more and do it quickly?
Well, I don't think we have been cautious here. And in fact, I think in some ways we've been quite bold. I think, taking a position on refund credit notes when we were out on our own, and the CAA turned up quite a few months later was, in some ways the right thing to do, I think, for the industry and customers. But it was a bold thing to do. I think it would have been easy for Abta to go missing in action and to be absent. We didn't. We absolutely put ourselves in the front of that very vigorous debate, and we took a lot of criticism from various sides for that. And I think the work we've done on an operational level to support the members and the public, initially with repatriation, then ongoing advice about destinations, and now post-pandemic recovery. All of those are very practical things to do, and that's what Abta does. We are, focused on what will produce results rather than making a big noise. I think you're right on quarantine. Maybe through our experience, because we work with the Foreign Office very closely, we know that health guidance comes first. It comes first for the government and it comes first for the customers. And taking a stand against quarantine per se would be the wrong thing to do, and it would be ineffectual. And that's what we've seen. Whereas getting them to move away from blanket to targeted is much more productive. So we have been engaged with the government in all sorts of ways. We've been engaged with the members, and we've been talking to the public. We've done 4,500 media interventions over the course of this. We've had over 1 million customers visiting our customer website on COVID. So I think, as I say, no one could accuse Abta of gone missing in action. We've been there. The government doesn't always do what we want to do, and that's something you learn as a trade association and as whatever political view you have. You don't always win those battles. I think the pressure that we put on the government early on to say we need to have a furlough scheme wasn't just the travel industry; it was others, but collectively, that I think helped make the government put its hand in its pocket, to a great degree, to support jobs. And we'll continue that dialogue and we'll continue the pressure.
Okay. Did you allow yourself a small drink when the government and the CAA finally confirmed refund credit notes are financially protected?
Well, I didn't actually, but I was glad that something that we had said for quite a long time was finally confirmed. I think it's very important for customer confidence in refund credit notes that they came out and said that. And so, yes, it took longer than I would have liked, but I was very pleased when it finally was said.
Mark, thank you very much. I look forward to the convention, and I think other people should too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.